Today's chapel speaker, Dr. Chuck Swindoll, or as most of us know him, simply as Chuck, and that's the way most people around the world know him, simply as Chuck. He served Dallas Seminary well as the fourth president and is known by millions around the world for his practical application of the Bible to everyday living. He now serves Dallas Seminary as chancellor emeritus and is also the senior pastor teacher of Stonebriar Community Church in Frisco, Texas. He and his wife Cynthia reside here in the Metroplex and love to spend time with their 4 grown children and 10 grandchildren and 7 great-grandchildren. Shortly after I became the chaplain here, Chuck took a spill and as he says, boogered up his nose. And I was brand new on the scene, and I thought to myself, well, I am the chaplain. I think I'm just going to give him a call or an email and check on him. I mean, that's part of what I'm supposed to do. And so I did. And he emailed me back immediately thanking me. And so began a friendship with Chuck that I cannot tell you how highly I value. I appreciate it so much, Chuck. So would you please welcome Dr. Swindoll to our chapel today?
Good morning. I want to thank Chaplain Joe Allen for inviting me to speak in chapel several times this academic year. I'll be with you 3 times, counting today, this semester, and then 3 again in the spring semester. I always want to speak on things that will help you in the ministry. You will hear other speakers in this chapel that will talk about other subjects that will relate often to your studies or your world of academia. I will rarely address that. I will always go toward the practical side of ministry, because that is where you will spend your life in the days ahead, in whatever capacity the Lord leads you. This academic year, I've chosen to speak on the pros and the cons of ministry. In the fall semester, right now, I want to talk on what is it that makes the ministry difficult. And I want to cover 3 areas. The first one I'll cover today, and the next one in early this next month. And then the third one in toward the middle of November, I will talk on another subject related to the difficulties in ministry. What makes it tough? What makes it hard to deal with? And then in the fall, in the spring semester, I want to talk on the things that make it so rewarding, so fulfilling. We'll end on a really upbeat, positive note, for there are far more of those than there are of these that I'll be addressing during the fall semester. In answering the first question, I plan to cover 3 of the most notable areas that are often challenging in ministry. Today, I will address the subject of dealing with difficult people. Yeah. There will always be individuals who will take the fun out of your day or take the joy out of your career if you let that happen. Difficult people. Next time we're together in October, I'll talk about how we bring our own humanity into the scene of ministry and how that works against us and makes ministry difficult. Our temperament, our tendencies, frankly, our old sin nature, our habits that we have not broken that work against relationships. Often we are the cause for the difficulty that we face in ministry. And then the third time, when we come together in November, I want to talk about the things that happen to us that we never expected. The most recent one I can think of that we'll deal with when we're together in November would be, of course, the pandemic. We didn't see it coming. We didn't realize how extensive, lengthy it would be, or what a toll it would take on the way we do ministry. I don't know of a church today that wouldn't have to say, it required us to alter a number of things we'd been doing for years and to rearrange things and do them differently. We'll talk about that and, for example, things that happen in your family that you didn't see coming. Even with your partner in life who may become disillusioned or go on a long drift spiritually. And that takes a toll on you and the church or the ministry that you're serving. Things that happen to us that we didn't see coming. Today we're going to talk about the difficult people. Difficult sheep in the church. Sometimes they're difficult staff that serve, people that are working alongside you closely. Occasionally, they are officers in the church, people that were elected to be a part of the church leadership, and they become difficult. In the classroom, we'll just say it straight, some of your students are a pain in the butt. You're difficult for the profs to deal with. And you started out that way, and you're getting only worse as time passes. So don't think this is about someone else. You can be the one who is the problem. Anyone called into ministry must be both tender and tough. Both and, not either or. We must be full of grace and truth. We must be devoted and determined. We, as balanced ministers, must be people of merciful compassion and insightful discernment, willing to serve the flock and yet unwilling to be controlled by or manipulated by those within the flock. Hear these words carefully. Today they may not apply, one day they will. We must be patient and sensitive with newborn lambs as they are getting their sea legs and learning to walk in the Spirit. At the same time, we must be firm and strong with legalistic sheep, ornery church people, and for sure, treacherous wolves. Former Pastor Stuart Briscoe, who ministered for years in the Milwaukee area, suggests there are 3 qualifications for a pastor. Must have the mind of a scholar, the heart of a child, and the hide of a rhinoceros. I couldn't agree more. Being a faithful minister of integrity has nothing to do with being a people pleaser. Some of you are already forming that habit, thinking that's what a good minister is called to do. Not so. You are not called to cultivate a popularity cult through flattery of others, or softening the truth, or compromising the message as you tell people what they want to hear, rather than shaping your message based on the scriptures and delivering what they need to hear. There's a great difference between the two. You must learn not to adapt your words to what is politically correct, though there will be those in your congregation who guide their lives according to that standard. You must not keep in step with those who urge you to keep everything relevant. You'll hear that a lot these days. If you're committed to preach the word, you'll need to be determined not to pay attention to anyone who tries to pull you away from becoming a faithful and consistent expositor of the Scriptures. You determined that in your years at seminary, believe it or not. You don't suddenly turn there once you've graduated. Hear this warning. There are still many wolves in sheep's clothing. They lurk in most churches. In the days of Martin Luther, he had his problems with Pope Leo X. In fact, he was considered such a maverick that Leo gave him the name of a wild boar in God's vineyard. Luther turned those words on the Pope himself and saw him as the wild boar. The fact is, you will encounter wild boars in God's vineyard. Dr. Richard Sumi, in his heyday at the school, in teaching the Timothy letters, used to refer to these individuals without mincing words. He called them savages. Maybe that's too strong for you to hear today, but you'll live to see the day when you realize they fit that description. You will meet them in the Scriptures when Saul was ravaging the church. Study that word and you'll realize it means exactly what it says in Acts 8:3. Elders from Ephesus are warned about the wolves that were among them, Acts 20, verse 29. Legalists, according to Paul's writing to the Galatians in 2, 4, and 5, sneaked in and spied out our liberty. They're still doing that. And you will really earn your right to be called a shepherd of the sheep when you encounter and deal directly with legalists. They are among the most difficult in the church. The list goes on and on. In fact, I brought with me, I won't have the time to read it, 2 8.5 by 11 pages, single spaced, of people in the Scriptures who dealt with difficult people in their lives. There's hardly a major individual you could name who didn't have an enemy or several enemies. This is time for me to make a disclaimer. I'm not saying any of this to make you suspicious or to frighten you or to make you jaded as you step into the work of ministry when you leave the school. I'm not even suggesting that most churches are filled with difficult people. That's not true. They are not. Some are, most are not. But there are always difficult people in whatever church you serve. They don't set out to be that. They just, over the years, have become that. I'll add that most churches are not difficult places to serve, but some are. While most are loving and thoughtful and understanding and kind, I would even add encouraging and generous, there are some that are caustic, independent, argumentative. They have a reputation for resisting whatever shepherd is called to lead that flock. Remember that when you step into ministry. Go with your eyes open. Just as you would tell one of your growing teenagers when they get to college or when they get into the military or go into business, go into those things with your eyes open. Realize there are people who do not have your good at heart. Take off your rose-colored glasses when you step into ministry and wear glasses that are filled with realism. Now then, let's look together at a somewhat obscure section in Paul's letter to the Romans. It's toward the end of that letter as he zeroes in on some of the difficult people in the church at Rome. I'll take just a small section of these verses, Romans 16, 17 through 20, where Paul points out some of the Boars in the Roman vineyard. Romans 16, 17 to 20 reveals that there were those, to begin with, who were causing dissensions. You'll see that named in the very word itself. The original term actually means divisiveness, polarization, by casting doubt. Cynthia and I often refer to people like this as those who stir the pot. There are those who take delight by subtle questions and accusations and innuendo. They find delight in spreading false information. And often it will be about you, the leader. Things you did not say or even imply, they will spread as though you did both. William Barclay refers to this individual as a man or woman who speaks well but acts ill. The kind of person who, behind a facade of pious words, is a bad influence, who leads sheep astray, not by direct attack, but by subtlety, who pretends to serve Christ, but in reality they are destroying the faith of others. Close quote. Be aware. Be aware. As a shepherd, keep your eyes open. Pay attention to those, especially those who are influencing others in the church. Not out of jealousy. You'll find delight in those that teach the scriptures well. They are part of the team. But those who do so with wrong motive will soon reveal themselves as among those boars in the vineyard. Second, along with spreading dissension, they cause hindrances. You'll see here in this passage. The Greek word is skandala. Obviously, scandal from that word. I found that such people create drama as they stir the pot among those they influence. Now, why do they do this? Why the dissensions? Why the hindrances? What reason do they have for doing that? Paul takes off the gloves as he identifies the reason. He shoots straight in verse 18. Such people are not serving Christ our Lord, he states. They are serving their own personal interests. Make no mistake. Such people are self-serving. John R.W. Stott states that this description, self-serving, is a graphic metaphor of self-indulgence. It's all about them. They're the star of the show. They're the ones who are getting the attention. Then Paul says it like it is at the end of verse 18. By smooth talk and glowing words, your Bible may read flattering words, they deceive innocent people. Therein lies the tragedy. Every church has both mature and immature saints. Those who are less mature, I call innocent. They don't know that they're around people that can't be trusted. They don't realize how innocent they are, how gullible. They are like defenseless sheep, seduced and led astray. That's why they need you. That's why they need a strong shepherd, a faithful shepherd. What happens is that harmony is disrupted. You'll find as you minister in whatever capacity that when harmony is disrupted, there is a disunity that replaces it. That's tough to deal with. It proliferates. It doesn't become less, it becomes greater, which explains the whole idea of the word picture. Boars in God's vineyard, they make a dreadful, dreadful scene. Now, how's the problem to be handled? What do you do about it? Now, if you're like most reluctant shepherds, you will put up with it too long. I did that for the first number of years in ministry. I looked the other way. I acted like it wasn't happening. I ignored the warning signs. I thought maybe it would get better on its own. In fact, I didn't even want to think it was going on, which makes me appreciate the very first word that Paul uses when he deals with how it's handled is watch out. There needs to be close observation. Faithful shepherds watch out for their flocks. They care about them. Not out of jealousy, but out of diligence. And then you will notice at the end of verse 17, the strongest of the terms, stay away from them. Not only observation, but there must ultimately, if there isn't change, there must be separation. Turn away from them. You've not earned your right to be called a shepherd until you have done your work in this realm. It is not pleasant, it is not easy, and it certainly is not popular. Realize individuals who have gained the mastery over a few people often have a following, and those followers are loyal. They don't see the danger in the one they're following. You do. And so that's the reason it's unpleasant and unpopular. You'll be misunderstood by some by dealing with it, and you'll be maligned by others because you have taken it on privately, personally, and directly. This is especially true when you confront those who have gained that group of followers and they have become popular in the place where you minister. You'll deal with various carnal, angry, stubborn Christians who will disrespect you and resist your counsel and resent your confrontation. In a former church, we had a person who was a very gifted individual. She had taught classes not only in our church, but in the communities around our church. She was well known and by many well respected. She was, however, a gossip. She was difficult to deal with. She stirred the pot regularly. She worked against the direction I was taking the church, and our elders were trying to take it. Was always something wrong with our plan, according to her evaluation. And would you believe, out of those many years I was at that church, I put up with it for 16 years. I state that deliberately, not because I'm proud of it, but I'm ashamed of it. Now, it wasn't planned that I would wait that long. It's just you keep putting it off. It isn't pleasant. As I said earlier, it isn't popular. And when you want to be liked more than you want to be right, you'll let it go on and on and on. Finally, it fell my lot to deal with it. I brought in my closest associate, and along with that, I brought in the chair of our elders. They were in the room when I asked her to come in. I confronted her with the wrong, and she looked at me like a calf looking at a new gate. Me? You're talking about me? And then I began to name evidence after evidence, example after example, one issue after another, after another, after another. Even confessed to her that I had overlooked those things I had no business overlooking. And it had come to an end. She was through. It's one of the few times that I have, let me put it nicely, that I have invited people to try another church for their own good. And it's always difficult to know what church to recommend. So I usually do not recommend which church, but it won't be this one. I'll make that clear. Her husband was not with her, perhaps a fault on my part, but that was the last I ever heard from either one of them. Let me add, not in my notes, but from memory, the relief was palpable. The release from all of the pot stirring and troublemaking and gossip and innuendo. Now, I wasn't popular with her sister, who was in the church. And when she confronted me the following Sunday, I quietly made it clear, you're next. And it's amazing how that quieted her down as I said that. When I was younger, I would have never done that. When you get older, you get a little crusty. And hopefully not cranky, but you get tired of it. And you know what else is more important? The sheep need protection. They don't need to be around that. They're learning wrong things. They're also learning that you're passive as a leader. I think the respect for me grew as a result of dealing with it, though there were some in her group that left with her. That was also a nice change. We quickly filled the pews with those who were longing to come to the church and couldn't find a place to sit. Now they had a place, and they came with delight and anticipation, looking forward to a place of worship they could enjoy. I repeat, it is unpleasant and it is unpopular. But if you do the work of discipline as it should be done, always with witnesses, always making sure that those you answer to, in my case, a group of elders, know the full story. In fact, as mentioned earlier, I had the chair of the elders with us, and they all understood. Interestingly, it never once urged me to do it. That was my call. That was my responsibility. And it's yours. Someday, it will be yours. Now, I can just read some of your minds. I can just see some of you thinking, I'm just gonna go to a church that doesn't have people like that. Well, welcome to Mars. That's on another planet. They'll be there. and some of them lie in wait. Had a young man who was a graduate of Master's Seminary, very fine preacher, excellent expositor, called me with tears. And I called his name as we were on the phone, and I said, I'm so glad to hear from you. Haven't heard from you in a long time. He said, well, since we've last talked, I've changed churches. And then he just sobbed. I said, what on earth is happening? He said, there is an old man in our church that has run off 3 pastors before me, and he's made it clear that I'm next. And he spread the word that I'm guilty of this and I'm not, that I'm not doing that and I am. And he said, I just don't know what to do. I said, well, get out a piece of paper and a pencil, and I will give you some directions. And I went over many of the things I've just covered here. He was as quiet as a church mouse. He said, okay. He would on occasion say, are you serious? And I said, yep, I'm serious. Go there. I said, let me ask here, do your elders know what he's doing? Well, most of them do. Were they there before you got there and watched all this? Yep, most of them were. Well, you need to break him of a very bad habit. You need to expose him. Called his hand. He said, well, he's 80 years old. I said, I don't care if he's 180, 210. He needs to be confronted. He's making your life and many in the church miserable. He said, well, he certainly is. And yet, he's really rich. I said, I don't care if he's rich. That doesn't qualify him for doing what he's doing. Call him in privately and tell him if it doesn't change, you're going to make it known publicly. I said, well, when do I do that? I said, how about next week? How about this week? He said, okay. He's writing this down. And I said, get your elders ready for it. And he did that. That week, he called the old guy in, confronted him. And he said he balked at first, kind of looked down. He said, well, I never thought I'd be talked to like this. And I said, did you back off? He said, no, not once. You told me not to back off. Right here. He's reading it right here in the paper. I said, well, that's right. You followed through well. How'd the elders do? He said, you know what? Man, they stepped up. And I said, how about that following Sunday? He didn't show up. I said, that's great. If he shows up and starts making trouble, expose him publicly. Call him by name. He said, are you serious? I said, yeah. I did that once with an elder who was a child molester. It had been going on for some time. No one knew it. When we found out about it, we confronted him as a group of elders, and he was sort of the hero of the church at the time until we investigated and found out the truth. Newspapers, reporters showed up. They had their cameras ready, and the TV was there. They had heard about what was going to be done, but they had nothing to report except an article that appeared in the paper the next week that said, finally, a church handles it like it should be handled. Don't be afraid of doing what is right. Don't be afraid of standing against what is wrong. There may be those who played a major part in your being called to that church. I've had that happen. It's sort of a known factor that often the one who is most influential in your being called turns against you when the church begins to appreciate your ministry, and out of jealousy, he works against you. They may be older than you are. Often they are. They may be long-standing in the community, influential, intimidating, always powerful people. Let me tell you about an elder that I dealt with in a former church. Another place, another time in my life. He was angry all the time. I rarely knew him when he wasn't angry. He was angry in elder meetings. Unfortunately, he had been elected as the chair of the elders. And there we were under that man's influence. Everything I tried to move the church into, he worked against. Every time I attempted to deal with things like discipling elders and working alongside them and carrying out new ideas, he stood against them. And in a fit of rage, he came in one cold evening. I was at the study by myself. He stomped in and slammed the door, and he looked at me and he said, I've about had as much of you as I'm going to take. And he pulled his coat back kind of like this, and this is no exaggeration, there was a revolver stuck in his belt. He said, you know, I carry a gun. In fact, I'm not afraid to use it. He turned it on the butt of the gun, and he pounded out the bullets. They fell on the desk. He said, just remember, I'm not afraid to use this when I need to. Put every one of the bullets back in, slammed it shut, put it back in his waist, and walked out. Welcome to the ministry, huh? Nobody ever told me at Dallas Seminary I may face somebody like that. Nobody at the church ever warned me that the man carried a gun. He's a psychopath. He's a very sick man. He's dead now through a number of events that have happened. In fact, before I moved from that church, one of my prayers was, Lord, remove him so that the man who takes my place will not have to deal with him for as long as I've had to deal with him. Even attempts at confronting him never worked. And would you believe, the day I read my resignation before that church service that morning, Scout's honor, he came into my office, threw his keys on my desk. He had carried the keys to the church for all those years. And he said, well, I'm out of here. And I didn't know whether to shout or wind my watch. I mean, I was thrilled. He said, I decided to move. And he moved a number of miles away and was never there from the day I read my resignation on. Isn't God good? How he takes care of things that I was not able to take care of. Let me get even more serious. In a former church, our receptionist named Sharon received a phone call from a man she didn't know. He said, is this the church that teaches people about Jesus Christ? Are you the ones who have that teacher that urges them to follow him as their master? She was thrilled to hear him ask that. She answered, well, yes, that's us. You're invited to come anytime. He said, no, I'm not interested. I'm a part of the church of Satan. All of us are working against you, and especially against your teacher. And I'm calling to tell you, we will win. Hung up the phone. That wasn't bad enough. Several weeks later, one of our members was on a flight, flying from where we were located at the time to New York City. Happened to be in first class. The meal was served, and the man next to her didn't eat the meal. And she looked over there and said, you're not hungry, it's late in the day. I thought everybody would be eating today. He said, no, we're fasting. Oh. She thought she was meeting a fellow believer, and he said, I'm a member, I'm going to read this, I'm a member of a group of Satan's followers. We're fasting and praying to our master that at least 100 marriages of Christian leaders will break up by the end of this year. Did you know that went on? Did you know that kind of thing goes on? Gives new meaning to the statement when you enter into ministry. You don't step onto a playground, but a battleground. This is serious stuff. And if you're given to kind of playing around with things as you're going through your schooling, it's a good time to leave. Ministry's nothing to play with. They play for keeps out there. You'll be needed like no one else in the church is needed. How easy to ignore the words that we just sang. And though this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear. For God hath willed his truth to triumph through us. The prince of darkness, grim, we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure. Lo, his doom is sure. One little word shall fell him. The enemy is real, men and women. Real. As real as a Satanist fasting, praying to their master that one of us will fall or our marriage will fail. This is the time to grow up, to realize that what you're learning is a game plan for life. Next time I'll talk about the things we bring with us into ministry that make ministry difficult. Today it's about people, actual individuals, folks you've not yet met, but you will. You'll need to be ready, and you'll need to be strong. Back in 1985, Marshall Shelley wrote a little book I wish every one of you would read. I mean that. It's titled Well-Intentioned Dragons. Well-Intentioned Dragons. Marshall begins, oh, by the way, the subtitle is Ministering to Problem People in the Church. Marshall begins, dragons, of course, are fictional beasts, monstrous reptiles with lion's claws, a serpent's tail, bat wings, and scaly skin. They exist only in one's imagination. But there are dragons of a different sort, decidedly real. They leave ulcers, strained relationships, and hard feelings in their wake. They don't consider themselves difficult people. They don't sit up nights thinking of ways to be nasty. But for some reason, they undermine the ministry. They're not naturally rebellious or pathological. They're convinced they're serving God. But they wind up doing more harm than good. They can drive pastors crazy or out of the church. If you do not get a handle on this, chances are good you'll become a victim. And you'll leave the church a broken man or woman, disillusioned, deeply, deeply disturbed. Your whole frame of reference will have changed because you didn't ready yourself for difficult people. My hope is that God will keep you strong, stable, positive, determined, committed to the work of the ministry, but never gullible, not passive, on the alert, watching out, being ready, when necessary, taking charge. Remember Jesus' words? The one who was so gracious to say, "Come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest." Short time later said to one of his followers, "Get behind me, Satan." The one who came to the last meal with his disciples whom he loved to the end, spoke to them in these warm and encouraging terms, said to one of them, "Whatever you're going to do, do it quickly. Get out." That's the Savior. Both and, not either or. Staying in ministry requires mind of a scholar, heart of a child, the hide of a rhinoceros. Remember that. Remember that. Thank you, dear Father, for the way you love us, watch over us, protect us. For the years you've done that for me, all the mistakes I've made, all the times I've looked the other way when I should have walked into the battle. And I realize today when I speak, I'm no great example of all of this, but I can speak from experience. When I've done what I should have done, you honored it. Help these men and women as they form their opinions about ministry to keep it real, so they might serve you with a whole heart, as shepherds who love the flock and at the same time guard it well from wolves. In Jesus' name. Everybody said?